there's a moment, a specific, terrifying, brutally honest moment that happens to almost every single person who's ever wanted more out of their life. It doesn't happen at noon. It doesn't happen when you're surrounded by people. It happens at 3 a.m. When the world goes quiet, when the distractions finally run out, and you're lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and this thought creeps in like smoke under a door. The thought that says, what if the problem isn't your circumstances? What if the problem is you? Not your laziness, not your schedule, not your lack of resources, but something deeper, something you've never actually looked at directly. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you changed everything for the people who actually heard it. If this is the kind of content that makes you think differently about yourself and the world, do yourself a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, because we put out videos that go places most creators are too afraid to go. And you don't want to miss what's coming. This channel is built for the person who's done with surface level advice. The person who knows something is off but can't quite name it yet. If that's you, you're exactly where you need to be. Now let's get into this. Picture this. A guy named Marcus, 29 years old, smart guy, genuinely smart. The kind of person who reads books on weekends, who can hold a conversation about philosophy and economics in the same breath, who has a list on his phone of business ideas, creative projects, fitness goals, relationship intentions. A real list, updated regularly, color-coded even, and yet Marcus has been in the same job for 4 years that he hates. He hasn't started any of those businesses. The fitness goal has been, start Monday, for about 16 Mondays in a row. And the relationship, he keeps telling himself he'll put himself out there once he feels more ready, more stable, more like the version of himself he imagines he could be. Sound familiar? I want you to hold that image of Marcus in your mind, because Marcus isn't a cautionary tale. Marcus is a mirror, and most people, when they look into this particular mirror, they look away fast. Here's the thing about being stuck that nobody in the self-help world actually wants to admit. Being stuck is not a productivity problem. It's not a discipline problem. It's not even a motivation problem. Those are the symptoms. What I'm talking about is the root, the thing underneath the thing. And to understand it, we have to go back to Marcus at 3 a.m., because this is where the story gets interesting. Marcus is lying in bed. It's 3:17 in the morning. He has work in 5 hours. He should be asleep, but his brain won't stop, and not in the productive, creative, buzzing kind of way. In the anxious, circular hamster wheel kind of way. He keeps thinking about an email he needs to send to a potential client. A side project he's been sitting on for 8 months. 8 months. He drafts the email in his head. He edits it. He second guesses the tone. He wonders if the idea is even good enough. He thinks about what his coworkers would say if it didn't work out. He thinks about what his dad would say. He thinks about a presentation he gave in middle school where he said the wrong thing and 23 kids laughed at him. And somehow, inexplicably, that memory from 17 years ago is now the reason he can't send a business email in the present day. He doesn't connect those dots though. He just feels heavy, stuck, like there's a foot on his chest and he can't identify whose foot it is. And then, at 3:23 a.m., Marcus has the realization, the one that changes everything. But here's where it gets complicated. And here's where most people stop reading, stop watching, stop listening. Because the realization isn't comfortable. It never is at 3 a.m. What Marcus realizes in the dark, in the quiet, is that he is afraid. Not of failure in the abstract. Not of some general concept of things not working out. He's afraid of something so specific and so personal that he's spent years building an entire architecture of excuses around it, just so he'd never have to look at it directly. He's afraid of finding out that he tried his absolute best and it still wasn't enough. That's it. That's the thing. And I know that might sound simple when I say it out loud like that, but think about what that fear actually means. Think about what it means to carry that. If you never really try, then you never really fail. You can always tell yourself the story that you were capable of more, that you just didn't have the right conditions, that the timing wasn't right, that you were going to get to it. The unlived potential stays beautiful and intact, like a car you never drive because you don't want to get a scratch on it. But here's the brutal irony. The car rusts anyway, and now you've got a rusted car and a lifetime of what-ifs. This is what psychologists call self-handicapping, and it is one of the most sophisticated, most unconscious, most destructive things the human mind does to protect itself, and almost nobody is talking about it. Not really. Not in a way that actually lands. Let me give you the science. Because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating, and honestly, a little unsettling if you're the kind of person who likes to believe you're in control of your own choices. In 1978, two psychologists named Stephen Berglas and Edward Jones ran a study. They gave participants a test. Some of the participants were told they did well. Others were told they did well but weren't sure why, which created uncertainty about their own ability. Then, before the second test, participants were offered a choice. They could take a performance-enhancing drug, or they could take a drug that would actually hurt their performance. I know. Wild setup. The people who were uncertain about their own ability, the ones who weren't sure if their success was real or luck, they disproportionately chose the drug that would hurt their performance. Think about that for a second. They sabotaged themselves. On purpose. Unconsciously. Because if they failed with a handicap, the failure didn't mean anything about their real ability. Their ego stayed safe. Their potential stayed intact. The unlived potential. The beautiful, unscratched, rusted car. And this isn't some rare psychological quirk that only happens in lab experiments. This is happening in your life right now. I'm almost certain of it. And the way it shows up is so subtle, so normalized, so baked into your daily routine that you've probably given it a completely innocent name. I'm just not ready yet. I need to do more research. I work better under pressure. I'm waiting for the right moment. I'll start when things calm down. These aren't reasons. These are exits. Elegant, socially acceptable exits from the arena of real effort. And the terrifying thing is, the smarter you are, the better you are at constructing them. Marcus was very good at constructing them. But here's where the story takes a turn. And this is the part I need you to really stay with me for. Because we're about to go somewhere that most motivational content never goes. And it's the reason why most motivational content doesn't actually work. We've established that Marcus is afraid. We've established that the fear is unconscious. We've established that his behavior, the procrastination, the endless preparation, the perpetual almost starting, is actually the brain's way of protecting him from the specific pain of discovering that his best might not be enough. But here's what we haven't talked about yet. Why does Marcus believe, somewhere deep in that wiring, that his best wouldn't be enough? Because nobody starts believing that on their own. Nobody is born with a ceiling on their own potential tattooed into their subconscious. That belief came from somewhere. And when we find where it came from, that's when the real work begins. Marcus grew up in a house where results were everything. His father was a self-made man, built a business from nothing, worked 80-hour weeks, had a very specific idea of what success looked like, and a very specific list of things that didn't qualify. Marcus was a creative kid. He liked to draw. He liked to write stories. he was obsessed with building things, not buildings exactly, but systems. He'd spend hours designing elaborate games with his own rules, his own logic, and his father, who loved him, who genuinely loved him, looked at these things and said, "That's cute, but what's the plan? What are you actually going to do?" And Marcus learned something. Not because his father was cruel, but because love sometimes teaches the wrong lessons without knowing it. He learned that what he naturally gravitated toward wasn't serious, that his instincts couldn't be trusted, that he needed external validation, a grade, a salary, a title, before he could consider himself on the right track. And so Marcus spent the next 20 years outsourcing his sense of direction to other people's definitions of success. And because those definitions never quite fit, he never quite committed. Because you can't go all in on a version of yourself you don't actually believe in. And you can't build something real on a foundation you borrowed from someone else. This is the psychological barrier nobody names. It's not fear of failure in the generic sense. It's a misalignment between who you actually are and the identity you've been trying to live up to. And when those two things don't match, forward motion becomes almost impossible, because some part of you, some very wise, very self-protective part of you, refuses to put everything into something that doesn't feel like yours. Now here's where I want to pause, because I know some of you are nodding along, and some of you are feeling something uncomfortable right now, something that feels like recognition, and I want you to sit in that for a second. Because what I'm describing isn't weakness. It's not a character flaw. It's not evidence that you're broken or that something went wrong with you. It's evidence that you are human. That your mind has been doing exactly what minds are designed to do: protect you, keep you safe, preserve your sense of self. The problem isn't the protection mechanism. The problem is that the mind protecting you from pain in 1998 is now protecting you from growth in the present day. And it doesn't know the difference. It's running on old code. The threat isn't the same, but the response is. And until you consciously intervene, it will keep running that same program on a loop. This is what they mean when they talk about psychological barriers. Not some mystical force, not a personality defect. A learned pattern of self-protection that has outlived its usefulness. And here's the mini cliffhanger I promised you. Because we've talked about what the barrier is. We've talked about where it comes from. But the part I haven't told you yet, the part that actually determines whether Marcus, whether you, whether anyone changes, is not about willpower. It's not about discipline. It's not about finding the right motivational quote, or the right morning routine, or the right productivity system. Because all of those things, every single one of them, are strategies that live above the line. They're surface-level interventions for a below-the-line problem. And applying a surface-level solution to a deep psychological pattern is like putting a fresh coat of paint on a house with a cracked foundation. It looks better for a minute, but nothing is actually fixed. So what does actually work? Stay with me, because this is where it gets real. There's a concept in psychology called identity level change, and it was popularized in a way most people know, though they often don't credit it correctly, by a researcher named James Prochaska, and later built upon by habit researchers and behavioral scientists who were trying to understand why some people change permanently and others cycle through the same patterns forever. The insight is devastatingly simple. You don't change your behavior first and then change your identity. You change your identity first, and the behavior follows, which sounds great on paper, but here's the problem. Here's the real, practical, why doesn't anyone talk about this honestly problem? You cannot simply decide to have a different identity. You can't sit down with a journal on Sunday morning and write. I am now a disciplined, purpose-driven, high-achieving person, and have that be true. Because your brain doesn't update its model of you based on intentions. It updates based on evidence. And the evidence it's been collecting for years, for decades in some cases, is telling a very different story. So how do you create new evidence? How do you rewrite the story? This is where we get to the mechanism. The actual, practical, unsexy, unglamorous mechanism of real change. And I want you to lean in for this, because most people hear this and nod, and then go right back to doing nothing, because the answer requires you to think differently about what progress even looks like. The answer is almost embarrassingly small. And that's why it works. When Marcus has the 3 a.m. realization, the thing that would genuinely help him is not to set a massive goal, not to make a dramatic declaration, not to overhaul his entire life in a weekend. The thing that would help him is to send the email, just the email, not the business, not the launch, not the full plan, the email. And then, the next day, one more small act of evidence, a 5-minute voice memo of his idea, a single conversation with someone in the industry, one tiny data point that says, I am the kind of person who moves forward. And what happens in the brain when you do this, and this is the neuroscience that makes it genuinely compelling, is that you start to rebuild what's called your self-efficacy, your brain's working model of what you're capable of. Every time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, even in a tiny way, you deposit a piece of evidence into a new account. And at first the balance is almost nothing. You've got decades of withdrawals on the old account. But the thing about the brain is, it doesn't just count votes. It weighs recent votes more heavily. The most recent evidence of who you are matters more than old evidence. Which means change can happen faster than you think once you actually start generating new evidence. Once you stop waiting to feel ready and start acting in order to feel ready. The feeling follows the action, not the other way around. And I cannot stress how backward this is from how most people think about motivation. Most people think, when I feel motivated, I'll start. But the neuroscience says, when you start, motivation follows. The brain releases dopamine not in anticipation of reward. It releases dopamine in response to forward movement. Progress is the fuel, not the result of fuel. Progress is the fuel. And this is the part of the story where our Marcus makes his move. It's 30:29 in the morning. He picks up his phone. He opens the email he's been drafting in his head for 8 months. He writes it, not perfectly, not brilliantly. He writes it in 8 minutes, which is about 7 months and 3 weeks faster than he's been writing it in his imagination. He doesn't read it 20 times. He reads it twice. He sends it, and then he puts his phone down, and something happens that he doesn't expect. He feels lighter. Not because the business is launched, not because the response came back positive. The email won't even be opened for 6 hours. He feels lighter because he did something that was aligned with who he actually wants to be. He gave his brain a piece of evidence. 1 vote for the new Marcus. And here's the part of this story that I think is the most important thing I've said so far. The response to that email doesn't matter as much as the fact that he sent it. Because the point of the email wasn't the reply. The point of the email was the evidence. The point was telling his own nervous system, hey, I am someone who moves. And that evidence, that single piece of evidence at 30:29 in the morning, becomes the foundation of every next move. Not because Marcus suddenly became a different person, but because he gave his brain a new data point to build from. 1 piece of evidence at a time. But wait, I told you there was a twist, and I'm not done. Because here's the thing about psychological barriers that even the best self-help books tend to gloss over. Removing the barrier once doesn't mean it's gone. The brain is not a one-time clean install system. It's a living, adaptive, pattern recognizing machine that will keep reverting to familiar patterns unless those patterns are actively and consistently replaced. Which means that Marcus, after he sends the email, will feel great for approximately 48 to 72 hours. And then something will happen. A setback, a silence from the client, a negative thought, a bad day at work, and the old patterns will knock on the door again. And this is where most people fall apart. Not at the starting line. Not at the 3 a.m. realization. They fall apart at the second obstacle. Because they thought the realization was the transformation. But the realization is only the beginning. The transformation is the daily, unglamorous, often invisible work of choosing the new identity even when it's not easy. Especially when it's not easy. And here's the real truth about that. The truth that I think most of you need to hear more than anything else I've said. You will not always feel brave when you do the brave thing. You will not always feel confident when you do the confident thing. That's not a sign that you're not ready. That's literally what growth feels like. The discomfort is the data. The resistance is the signal that you're going somewhere new. And if you actually learn in your bones, that discomfort means progress instead of danger. You will become virtually unstoppable. Because you'll stop running from the very thing that's trying to take you somewhere. I want to talk about one more piece of this, because I think it's the piece that ties the whole thing together. And it's something Marcus discovers about 3 months after the 3 a.m. night. He's been sending emails. He's been making calls. He's been building slowly, messily, imperfectly. And one evening he's talking to a friend, someone who hasn't seen him in a while. And the friend says, "Man, you seem different? What changed?" And Marcus thinks about it. Really thinks. And here's what he realizes. Nothing dramatic happened. He didn't read one book that cracked the code. He didn't find a mentor who gave him the secret. He didn't have one perfect day where everything clicked. What changed was something so quiet and so incremental that he almost missed it himself. He stopped waiting to become the person who could do the thing, and started doing the thing in order to become the person. He closed the gap between his identity and his actions. Not all at once, not in a moment, but one small, consistent, evidence-generating act at a time. And here's the mind-blowing thing about this, the thing that should make you want to stop everything and sit with it for a minute. That shift, that fundamental shift in how he related to himself and to action and to the future, didn't require more discipline. It didn't require more willpower. It required something far more available and far more powerful. It required a decision about what story he was going to tell himself about who he was, and then the courage to act in alignment with that story before it felt true. We are all, every single one of us, living inside a story. A story about who we are, what we're capable of, what we deserve, what's possible for us. And most of the time, that story was written when we were too young to know we were being the author. By the time we're adults, we've forgotten we wrote it. We think it's just reality. We think this is just how things are, how we are, how the world works for people like us. But it's a story, and stories can be rewritten, not by wishing, not by pretending, but by acting differently long enough and consistently enough that the brain updates its model, that the evidence changes, that the story changes because the story is based on evidence and you are now generating different evidence. This is the 3 a.m. realization. Not that you're broken. Not that you've wasted time. Not that it's too late. The 3 a.m. realization is that you have been the author this entire time and you didn't know it. And now you do. So here's where I'm going to bring this home. And I want you to hear this last part carefully. because I think it's the most important thing that separates people who change from people who feel inspired and then go back to exactly what they were doing. Knowing all of this is not enough. I'm serious. Everything I just told you, the psychology, the neuroscience, the story of Marcus, the identity, level change, the self-efficacy, the evidence accumulation, none of it matters if it stays in your head. The only thing that matters, the only variable that separates someone who transforms from someone who consumes transformation content, is a single moment of aligned action. One small thing. Today. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when the conditions are better today. Because here's what happens when you consume this content and do nothing with it. Your brain actually uses it against you. Seriously. There's research on this. When people read about working out, they feel a momentary sense of having taken a step toward being healthier. When people read about their financial goals, they feel a brief sense of progress toward financial security. The reading itself gives the brain a tiny hit of the feeling associated with the goal. And that hit reduces the urgency to actually do the hard thing. Which means that every video you watch, every book you read, every podcast you absorb about becoming a better version of yourself, if it's not followed by action, is actually making it slightly harder to change. Not because the content is bad, but because the brain is using the consumption as a substitute for the real thing. So I'm asking you, right now, before you do anything else, to think of one thing, one specific thing that the you who is stuck has been avoiding. Not a project, not a goal, one action, the email, the phone call, the 5 minutes in the gym, the difficult conversation, the first sentence. Whatever it is for you, I want you to name it in your head right now. Say it to yourself, because naming it makes it real, and then I want you to do it today. Not perfectly, not completely, just begin, because beginning is the evidence. Beginning is the first vote for the new identity. Beginning is how you rewrite the story. Let me leave you with this. The version of you that's capable of more, the one you see sometimes in your best moments, the one that shows up in your most honest 3 a.m. thoughts, that version isn't a fantasy. It's not an impossible ideal. It's you, with different evidence. You, with a different story. You, having made slightly different choices for long enough that your brain updated its model. And that version, that better, fuller, more alive version of you, is not waiting for you to become worthy. It's waiting for you to begin. That's it. That's the whole thing. Begin. And then begin again tomorrow. And again the day after. And somewhere in there, you won't even notice the exact moment when the shift happened. But one day someone will look at you and say, "Man, you seem different. What changed?" And you'll think about it. And you'll smile. Because you'll know. The 3 a.m. moment. The realization. The email you finally sent. The first vote for the new you. That's what changed. And it was available to you the whole time. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me this. What is the one thing you have been putting off that you know, in your gut, you need to do? Not a list. Just one thing. Because I read every single comment on this channel. And sometimes naming it publicly is the thing that makes it real enough to actually do. Be honest. Be specific. This is a safe space, and the community here will show up for you. I promise you that. And if this video hit different, if something in here landed in a way that you needed it to, I want you to do something. Send this to one person. You already know who I'm talking about. The friend who's been stuck. The family member who keeps almost starting. The version of someone you love who needs to hear that they're not lazy. They're not broken. They're just running on old code. Send it to them. Not because it's going to magically fix everything, but because sometimes just knowing someone sees you, someone is sending you something that says, "Hey, This made me think of you. Because I believe in you, sometimes that's the nudge that changes everything. Be that nudge for someone today. And if you're new here and you've made it this far, that tells me something about you. It tells me you're serious. So hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell. Because we do this every week, and the next video is going to go even deeper. We're not done yet. We're just getting started, and so are you.